Here's transport in the time of COVID. Update 18th of October 2022. So, still kicking off on Ukraine. Don't forget there are lots of people who are being deliberately targeted, and this is a way we can help them with bikes. Okay, four things. It's normally three things, but having a sliding in a fourth one, since I mentioned it last week. All the stuff about Shell sponsoring British cycling, that is still cracking on. A lot of people objecting every time. The British team did very well in the World Cycling Track Championships, and they've been getting a lot of flack on social media and an open letter which Road Danger Reduction Forum and others have signed. So watch this space. They're not getting an easy ride. Okay, on to the three main topics. Firstly, your victim blaming for tonight. Someone talked about the kind of vehicles that Ford are getting out on the streets. And so here's a bit of cloth-eared from Ford UK's Twitter account. Thank you for your post. We, of course, encourage road safety and education for children, especially as there are many commercial vehicles using our roads. So the answer to having these monsters where you can't see kids around them is to tell kids how to get out of the way. Now, leaving aside the morality of that, everybody knows that kids don't take on board the messages to be careful and watch out for traffic. They will run out on the road. They will behave like that. But it is fostering this kind of background ideology that basically your job is to defer to the powerful and dangerous, which is a sort of might is right philosophy. So, you know, this is the way they've been behaving. I'm going to be doing something about Ford UK on the RDRF website shortly. The second bit of victim blaming came from Edinburgh Southwest Police patrolling the canal towpaths after reports of cyclists being assaulted. Bodies of water can be dangerous places, which some people tend to forget. So, you know, a few tweets about how maybe it's the people who are assaulting the cyclists who are dangerous, or why are people riding down canal towpaths? It's because the highway has become too dangerous for them. So, bit of opposition. I like looking at this victim blaming stuff because there's a lot of forceful responses to it online in social media, and that's one of the most positive signs we've got nowadays. Second point. Yes, it's the all so sudden thing, which is going to be a repeat thing I'm doing every week. It's basically that whenever you raise issues about how there are problems to do with too many motor vehicles, particularly in cities, congestion, noxious emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, danger, physical health problems for the people using it, and so on. When you try and do just a little measure to maybe alleviate the problems a bit, you get this, oh, nobody told me, it's all so sudden. So this area is one where I talk about how we've been actually talking about these issues for yonks and yonks and yonks. And as it happens, I've been going through my files from 30 years ago, and I've picked up various bits and pieces from the professional press, from the public press, from the campaigning media, and I'll be showing some of these to you in this section every week. And the first one here is something from the Daily Telegraph correspondent in Brussels in June 1990, someone called Boris Johnson. He was the European Economic Community correspondent in Brussels. And he said, Brussels is preparing radical laws to curb car use in cities, the Environment Commission disclosed today. Singling out London, where the rise in vehicle ownership had caused congestion and pollution, he said, we consider independent transport a personal freedom. In the meantime, we are committing suicide. We are crazy rats. And a European Commission Green Paper calls for a significant shift in the balance in modes of transport. That would mean asking governments to give a fillip to public transport and may mean tolls for private cars. So that was being talked about in June 1990. That's 32 years ago, so it isn't sudden. Here's the numbers section, and I would like my colleagues here, I don't know if Adam Tranter's here, or Adam Reynolds, or Mark is here. So this is a number about how much funding is available. This is from Lucy Fraser. The department estimates that a minimum of 4.4 billion is likely to be required to meet its cycling and walking objections to 2025. And a minimum of 5.5 to 2030. So those are some numbers which, you know, I don't know where we are with the money for active travel funding. And I'd like, when I finish this, I'd like Mark to make a couple of comments.
Bob, thanks. Brilliant stuff. Mark, did you want to come in first?
Well, only to say there was a whole raft of questions that day. That was one of them, but that money, it's not clear, but I've had it confirmed that that's an estimate based on how much they think they should spend, not how much they're going to get. So that figure is another 5 years. I can't remember the figures that you had, Bob. But also in another question, it was confirmed that Active Travel England will have 710 million. So that's been confirmed last week, although as we know, who knows what happened last week will happen next week, could change again. But that's at least written in Hansard now that that's their budget, and the 2 billion is always just a made-up figure for all the things that all the various different governments are spending or have spent. It's the 710 million that's the most important figure, and that's over 3 years. And I'm told that will be put out soon, and it'll be a closing date of Christmas. But local authorities that scored 0 or 1, well, certainly who scored 0, but 1 will be encouraged to only bid for small schemes. In other words, if they bid for big schemes, they probably won't get it. Although obviously they won't say that they definitely won't get it, but they probably won't get big schemes. And they're encouraged to, if you like, cut their ambition to suit what they actually can deliver. Although that, I'm sure that won't stop some of them thinking that they can deliver more, bidding for really high numbers, so putting out a press release saying we bid for 10 million and then complaining when they only get half, 100,000 and blaming everyone else bar themselves.
Thanks, Mark. Tim, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just very quickly, speaking from a grade 3 listed local authority in terms of where we sit in the pantheon, just talking to people in the know-ish, that Active Travel England trying to get the money out the door as fast as possible before somebody says, oh no, you can't spend that money anymore. In fact, we need to close it down. We're probably going to be, we're looking at a couple of big type Cyclops things, and those are multi-million-pound schemes, and using working drawings designed by B. Deegan of this parish. So hopefully he will approve them when he comes to look at how good they are. Yeah, I come from the social housing world, and I'm used to things that you think have been put into law and given a budget and it all just vanishing overnight. So yeah, get the money out the door is my advice, and have sensible schemes, and always have more schemes than you have funding for, so that you can pull the right one in and stick, there's one for 100,000, right, we'll have that one. That's just a bit of advice from a utility cyclist from Earth.
Thank you, Tom. Tim, very sage advice, I have to say. Okay, we've got Adam and then Ruth. Adam?
Yeah, just a quick one. That means we, as far as I can work out, we've got active travel fund tranches 4 through 12 effectively committed with this, that 5.5. I may be wrong. I see Mark shaking his head. But that's the kind of what I believe we should be kind of moving towards, I think. But the other problem with it is that I don't know where the 5.5 billion figure came from or how they calculated it. Because if we've got 4.4 billion up to 2025 and another 5.5 coming through for up to 2030, the inflationary pressures on that should indicate that we should probably be talking at doubling that, probably at least around about 10 billion by 2030. But that's my own opinion. Looking at some of the financials around the sustainable settlement, that being the city, that those things have now got some really bad pipeline deliverables that they can't get through in time because the costs of delivering them has gone through the roof. And so you're going to start seeing some of the sustainable cities settlements, kind of transport settlements, cutting back on their deliverables in the next 2 or 3 years, simply because they just can't afford to do them with the budget that was allocated in 2021. So, yeah.
Thanks, Adam. Ruth, did you want to come in?
Oh, yes. My update is tomorrow, the Transport Select Committee, for anyone who's not working and available, will be interviewing, or whatever it's called, quizzing Annie Trevelyan. So, and Hugh Merriman is a very, very good chair, so he's always worth watching because he always brings up active travel, and I'm sure that funding will be mentioned. My other bit of news was today I was on a Reducing Car Dependency Outside Cities event from Foundation for Integrated Transport, and one of the key things that we discussed was that in Europe it seems to be that CPOs are raised for land alongside A roads to create safe cycling routes, and I'm sure any of you who've cycled in Holland, Germany, France will be aware of these. And yet here there does seem to be an antipathy towards doing that, not least from environmentalists who think you shouldn't be removing, okay, I know Mark's going to jump in, that you shouldn't be putting tarmac down for cycling, whereas personally I think it aids accessibility for all to be able to cycle 365 times a year. And finally, I went to the very excellent London Cycling Campaign AGM, which was really good, lots of different people there, and it's always good to catch up. My only thing would be that Seb Dance was there, who is Sadiq's sidekick, and I'd have liked to have had much more time with him, because it was a once in a lifetime opportunity to be able to actually quiz him in the room, but he was very good. That's it.
That was great. Thanks, Ruth. Brilliant stuff. And I'm sure we all want to tune into that tomorrow, whether we're working or not. We could watch it secretly on a browser while we're pretending to do some work. So let's all tune in. I mean, the problem is, though, we've got a week off next week for half term. So goodness only knows if the lettuce will have left us by that point. Anyway, Adam, is that a legacy hand? Or did you want to come back in? Legacy hand. Stephen, over to you.
I don't know if Simon was in front.
Okay. You were just you were a nose ahead.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to mention at Camden Cycling last night, we were told about the scheme at Holborn to remove the gyratory is about to go ahead. We were not quite ready to announce it to the public, but I think Will Norman's put it out on Twitter today, so I think it's safe to just let people know. It's quite a big scheme. It's got 2 million funding. Out of there was an original, was it 12 million? It was going to go a lot further along Theobald's Road as part of that intended connection with Old Street, which we had to make the lane demonstration for 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's a nice start. I can't really explain the scheme in detail, but if you check out, I don't know where it would be on TFL, or it'll be up on Camden site before long. So that's just a bit of news about the gyratory there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. Right, Simon, you're in next. Come on, Simon.
Yeah, just very briefly, it isn't a full gyratory for Holborn. It is just another step in the right direction, but it is a good step from what initial looks like. Also from London today, Centre for London produced their report, their long-awaited report on Kensington High Street, that says, unsurprisingly, that Kensington High Street needs massive traffic reduction, micro-mobility lanes, and a bunch of other stuff. RBKC's response, particularly unsurprising given they're going to be facing court action in December, is over the Kensington High Street scheme is, and I quote, "There is no silver bullet to achieve this quickly," i.e. the grass is very long and rather wavy. So I think we're going to wait on December and the court action from the Better Streets for KNC folks. Ruth, thank you very much for mentioning London Cycling Campaign. The AGM was the kind of dull bit really, but useful and important. But the important bit from my point of view was the Community Skills Summit. We had a wider range of people there than I think we've ever had before. And I said to Claire in direct message, but we launched a thing that we're calling Pathways there, which is about a 4-step approach to essentially getting everything we could possibly want in our borough groups, and we'll be launching that more over the rest of this year. So look out for that, and I'll probably come and after the half term come and present on it more fully here. But essentially we kind of got to a point where we realized that there are actually 4 very simple steps, not easy steps, I hasten to add, but simple steps to going from boroughs that do absolutely nothing and councils that do nothing to ones that do quite a lot. So we're going to try and test that out in London and make more of them go from step 1 to step 4.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. That sounds exciting. We'll talk about that after the half-term break. Amazing. Right, Ian, I'm coming to you and then over to Amy for the last bit of news.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Just a quick one. Those were on a couple of weeks ago. Remember, I did a presentation about Bristol, and I wanted to give an update on a couple of things. Both pieces of good news, actually. You may remember the infamous cycle lane in Bristol that was causing a flood on White Ladies Road that was covered widely earlier in the year. We had a meeting with Bristol Council last week, and they unveiled to us plans that involve retaining the bike lanes in both directions going forward. They found a novel solution that accommodates both safe pedestrian access, a protected bike lane, and the roadway. So that's really good news. That's still going to be ratified, but it's great they've unveiled it to us. And the other one I mentioned, off the back of the big ride that we did in Bristol, that we launched an e-petition. I'm very happy to say that that got over the threshold of 3,500 signatures after 2 weeks. So that was yesterday. And that means that we're guaranteed to get a full council debate on safer cycling with Bristol Council, which is good news as well. So I'm chuffed with both those things. That's me.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Great. We like good news, Ian. Right, Tim, you have to be super blisteringly fast before we go to Amy, if that's all right.
Yes, just a quick one. York Cycling. York City Council have put a planning application for a £65 million dualling of part of the Outer Ring Road, while their 1.2 million active travel schemes are still not being consulted on or even designs out for that. So we're quite disappointed in York at lack of progress from our one point council. So we're not going to probably get any more money by the sound of it. So any advice what we can do would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm giving an update on the webinar we had last night that Bob mentioned. And to remind you, it was in response to the consultation the Sentencing Council was doing on motoring offenses. It's their first consultation in 15 years. They're covering 12 offenses, 5 of them causing death by driving, 4 causing injury, serious injury mainly, and then another 3 basic: dangerous driving, drug driving, and in charge of a vehicle. When over the limit of a drug. So we held a webinar last night. They had proposed to come to our monthly meeting of roads policing campaigners in September, but that got postponed with the mourning period. So then we thought we'd just widen it and have a webinar. So we got various speakers in. We got from the Sentencing Council themselves to introduce the consultation. We had the leading academic who has written the book on driving offenses. Magistrates Association sent in a video because they'll respond to the consultation because they will be the ones deciding many of these charges. Cycling UK, Roger spoke up. And we also heard from an ex-Met officer who's got a pilot project in Lincolnshire where they're using electronic tags on disqualified drivers. So they're trialing that. And that was fascinating. Then we heard from a criminal barrister as well as Andy Cox stepping in at the last minute for the National Police Chiefs Council. Okay, I just want to go quickly. You won't be surprised that they are proposing to increase the sentences for causing death by dangerous driving. You may remember that the government increased the maximum custodial sentence to lifetime for causing death by dangerous driving and causing death by careless driving whilst under the influence. So as you can see on the left-hand side, they have increased it for the top 2 culpability levels, but they haven't changed it for the lowest level of causing death by dangerous driving. But then, sorry, the yellow shows where there's been increase proposed. But for causing death by careless driving, they've increased it across the board, which we are quite surprised at because we just didn't see the need for that, not in the stats. You've only got about 25% of drivers convicted of this charge being in prison compared to like 93% of causing death by dangerous driving. So sorry, our big point was that we thought the Sentencing Council had gone too hard on careless driving when they caused death and serious injury. And so the webinar was focusing on what was a fair sentence for careless driving that resulted in a death or serious injury. And then if you also look at causing serious injury by driving, these are both new guidelines, so we can't compare them to anything existing, but they're relying on prison, as you can see, for both causing serious injury by dangerous driving. We've got about 2/3 of the people convicted of that are sent to prison. And with causing serious injury by careless driving, they're estimating, government has estimated about 1/3 will be imprisoned. But yet the sentencing guidelines are suggesting a strong reliance on prison again. And what you have to remember, or you have to be warned about, is that there's the other charge of causing injury by wanton and furious driving. And that's the one they're using, they'll use with cyclists or e-scooter riders or anybody driving a motor vehicle off the road. And they're looking to peg that, or they'll say it'd be equivalent to causing serious injury by careless driving. So we're just worried that they're being too harsh with prison sentences for careless driving and for injury that's caused by cyclists. The last other thing I wanted to mention was that with disqualifications, there was no publicity given this, but now for causing death by dangerous driving and for causing death by careless driving under the influence, it's a 5-year minimum mandatory ban, which is great news. And the consultation did have a section on disqualification. It did have a question on it. They say they went out of their way to say it is a sentence. So they were giving it more priority, but we're still arguing that it's not enough. They're still a bit discouraging towards disqualification, saying that, you know, there's problems around enforcing it, and that if it was a long disqualification period, they may be more likely to drive unlawfully. They were saying that the new guidelines will just include general information about disqualification, but the only offense out of the 12 where they gave specific ranges recommended was for drug driving. And last thing I just want to highlight was the panel was strong in saying that they all thought they'd gone heavy on prison for careless driving. Well, the magistrates said it was in more diplomatic language. They were concerned, and they had talked about whether or not they had been gone too far. Sentencing Council said they had done modest uplifts. Professor Sally Kidd said that wasn't modest. That was a significant increase. But with disqualifications, everybody across the board was saying that more information had to be given, and that'd be useful if specific lengths were given. Because then really what we're asking for is longer sentences. This isn't about exceptional hardship, because that's with totting up. These are all offenses that are prosecuted at court, and most of them do result, driving ban is mandatory, but they could just be a lot longer at this point. Consultation has been extended, and I guess I just wanted to highlight that because they said they had over 300 responses. Many were for cyclists, and I think there were a lot of cyclists sending in template responses early on saying they supported the proposals, but I'd like to think that they're going to be reconsidering these. Also, they've just published a review of the effectiveness of sentencing on reoffending. And sentencing has different purposes. It can be just for punishment. It can be for to protect the public. But if you're looking at deterrence, there's no evidence that custodial sentence help. And they said the evidence showed that short sentences of 12 months or less were more likely to lead to a reoffending. Between that and also the fact that Scotland, the Scottish Sentencing Council is also consulting on causing death by driving. So they're looking at causing death by dangerous driving, causing death by careless, and another offense, but they're proposing much less use of prison and much more of community sentences. So that's, I just wanted to give you an update on the webinar and on the consultation, and I'll keep you posted.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Sally Watson, my good friend from Newcastle Cycling Campaign, knows that as I say, Town is an SME developer. Some of you might be familiar with some of our projects. I'm not going to talk about them for long because I'm only going to try and talk for about 8 minutes. But the we have a bee in our bonnet about parking, and obviously parking and its restraint and management is obviously only one aspect of good placemaking and an enabler of active travel. But it's a thing we have a particular bee in our bonnet about because it's done so badly and so much when it shouldn't be really. This is the kind of thing that we typically see in a development layout. If you stare at this for very long, your eyes will start to go numb, or you'll start thinking you're in a kind of Where's Wally film, because this is literally kind of Carmageddon parking-based standard suburban residential layout, where about 40% of the space is dedicated to the movement and storage of cars, and there's literally no place, no legibility here. You'll be familiar with this kind of thing. This is an absolute favourite of ours. We think that the actual proportion of the ground plane dedicated to the storage of cars in this, it must be not far off 70 or 80%. It's truly exceptional example, and actually this is in a scheme that that was recognised for good urban design. So that's go figure. And
Neil,
what's it about?
Sorry, Neil. Sorry to interrupt, Neil.
Yeah.
Should your slides have moved on, or are you just
They
on the
should.
first
Are they
slide?
not changing? Are they
No,
not changing?
afraid not. Do you want to share your?
Let's go again.
If you stop sharing, we can
Right,
stay
has that
going.
changed?
Now you're going. That's perfect.
Right. Horrible parking-oriented layout. There we go. That I was talking about before. Don't stare at it too long; it will make your eyes hurt. And then this won awards, or was recognised, I think, with a planning award for good urban design in the wider place. We've all seen this stuff. It's total Carmageddon. 3 issues really. Perception, which is a polite way of saying agents will tell you that if you don't have enough parking, no one will buy your house. And you might see in the background the Urban Splash scheme in New Islington, which actually had its parking limited by the planning authority, but cleverly provided these spaces in between the parking spaces in the parking court that was supposed to be landscaped, but they just didn't put the landscaping in, so every unit got 2 parking spaces instead of 1. So actually kind of pretty much breaking the rules in order to do something in basically the centre of Manchester. There's a real lack of infrastructure. That clearly that's about alternatives, but it's also about infrastructure as things like enough density to sustain the shop, which most new housing isn't done. But the single biggest reason in our experience why developers do this is because, or rather don't do parking restraint, is because the council doesn't make them. Indeed, often it's the absolute opposite. We've built a scheme finished about 3 years ago called Marmalade Lane, which is on the right here, and on the left is the previously existing block in an award-winning master plan by a well-known, actually good master planner, built out by a house builder in Orchard Park in Cambridge. These lot sizes are pretty similar, and Marmalade Lane is a co-housing scheme of about 42 units, and the scheme on the left is about 38, mostly townhouses, both in a kind of perimeter block type of layout. We did a little study to compare how the two kind of sat next to each other. So Marmalade Lane on the right, in common with co-housing principles, it keeps the parking out of the kind of core of the block, and it actually unifies quite nicely with a parking court kind of to a block previously existing on the right off screen. And then there's an area for kind of overflow parking because the council wanted us to provide more parking than the community needed, which is the dotted bit in the bottom, which was actually done as part of the landscape and is now being removed because they don't have many cars, and so the planning authorities finally agreed that they can take some of it out. And on the left in that kind of patch, that's the space within that block that's dedicated to the storage and movement of cars. And we did a bit of analysis that kind of looked at the relative land use, and in the block on the left, which again follows quite a lot of good urban design principles in terms of basic perimeter block structure, 38% of the space is used for parking. And in Marmalade Lane, it's 12%, and those are in the same lot sizes. And it's actually really hard to see when you have a place to parking ratio of 2.5, how you would ever use less than 40% of the surface area for parking. It's almost mathematically kind of impossible to do. This is another project that we're doing in Wolverton, which is one of the original railway towns that was sort of swallowed up by Milton Keynes City, as it is now, Milton Keynes New Town, where we are removing a sort of late 70s asbestos-ridden shopping centre and town centre car park and replacing it with essentially the kind of form of urbanism that used to be there before. This is 115 homes and some new shops and only 87 parking spaces between, and that's partly because we're slap bang in the middle of the town centre, 700 metres from a railway station, right next to some good bus services, and Milton Keynes' undoubtedly brilliant redway network. So real opportunity, but in a place kind of largely built for cars. Milton Keynes, it was a real push to try to get parking restraint. So there's some ingredients of a mobility hub in here, including 2 new bike hire schemes, EV car club, improved buses and so forth. But also it's about recognising that, you know, even in Milton Keynes, in this part of Milton Keynes, a quarter of homes don't own a car, and we shouldn't always assume, per the agents, that everyone who moves into a new home will have at least 2, which is what you're encouraged to do. So actually all the parking here is on street or in a Muse court, little one, on the left, which is like making use of an existing site level to create a sort of semi-sunken parking court. But it's all basically traditional on-street stuff and works nicely with the public realm. But it wouldn't work, and we couldn't do this kind of layout that has just won the Housing Design Award for the Building for a Healthy Life, if we and nice central courtyards and so on, if we had to provide parking at MK standard, which is 2 per dwelling overall, rather than about 0.7, which is what we have done. And this is what you get if you do restrain vehicles. So Marmalade Lane on the right, that's a pretty kind of well-worn image now. And on the left, that's one of the pedestrianised little streets that we're making with sort of front doors over a sort of play street right in the centre of Wolverton. Yeah, and here's some of the kind of scenes from what kind of goes on at Marmalade Lane on the sort of car-free lane that goes through the middle. Just really nice space for play. Even though it's not an adopted street, yeah, it's open to the public and people go through, and it's all very neighbourly. Couple of ideas just on future projects. So we've been doing some work on how to get progressive parking restraint in suburban locations where the Planning or Highways Authority just won't let you under-provide parking in the short run. You know, they're absolutely fixed on planned-in obsolescence. So this is a suburban site in a town in the south of England where we are looking at putting in a mobility hub type of building that effectively allows a large part of the site to be car-free. And will allow the amount of parking to be reduced over time, and that space repurposed to something more productive, such as workspace, bike parking, or other sort of other uses. And then this is a project we're working on, huge project on the northeast edge of Cambridge, known as the core site, with Cambridge City Council, Anglian Water and UNI, where the really interesting thing is that constraints of the highway network, now this is going to be 5,000 plus new homes, we are very likely to be restricted to a residential parking ratio of 0.2. So for once, the kind of highways constraints are actually pulling us in the direction of a really, really progressive, large-scale solution. And you know, this is some years away from moving forward, but really exciting opportunity to try out some clever stuff at scale. That's me. Thank you.
Neil, that was brilliant. Yeah, the Cambridge example at the end there, very exciting. That was amazing. So have we got anybody who'd like to ask a question or make a point? We've just got a round of applause from David Cox. David, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, it's very atypical, but Islington has had a car-free development for many years now, so you can't provide parking space except for the disabled, and there's no parking on the street, and that works very well. And maybe could it be repeatable in other inner urban areas outside London?
It absolutely could. I think it's just that a lot of councils see it as political suicide.
well, Islington Labour has been re-elected year after year.
Yeah, I think it's a sad fact that if I went into Newcastle Civic and said something works in Islington, I get short shrift, I think. But I completely agree with you, David.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Mark, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so Brighton had a policy of car-free developments, and it's actually was thrown out at local plan because they were advised it was illegal because you couldn't enforce the covenant not allowing people to apply for parking permits. So they've had to go for what they're calling low car, but their legal team, which presumably applies to every local authority in the country, says that NPPF and legal planning documents don't allow them to do legal, as in enforceable legal no car developments. I need a planning person to confirm that.
Yeah, quick comment. So we come across this in some places. So I think first, I mean, I know Brighton pretty well, Mark, and you know, it's one of many places with a mainly on-street parking, which won't grasp the nettle of basically needing to ration parking permits properly by making them more expensive, particularly second and third permits. My inner economist would design an auction system and it would raise a fortune. That would be the way I would do it. What we've done in some of the schemes, so Wolverton, none of the streets are going to be adopted by the council, even though the council is actually funding a large part of the project, because their own highways authority would have just completely taken the design apart. So one part of the council effectively supported not allowing another part of the council to adopt the street so that we could do all of those things and regulate use in a different way. Right.
And now we're off. We're going to explore the good, the bad, and the interesting with you, Mark. Where are you? Ranty Highwomen.
Subject to tonight's good, the bad, and interesting is Lower Mortlake Road at Manor Circus. I'll move to a couple of slides in a minute, but just have a look at this. I picked this up a few weeks ago. One of my favourite bot feeds on Twitter. It is sped up for some reason, but just look what's happening here. So kind of at the bottom of the screen, there's a person crossing, a zebra crossing. They're having to negotiate 3 lanes of traffic on that side. You'll see in the other direction, they've got to negotiate 2 lines of traffic, and just watch the traffic leaving the roundabout, kind of not much stacking space coming off the roundabout, 2 lines of traffic there. So yeah, it's popped up on Twitter a few times, this one. So I'm now going to stop sharing that and go to the slides, because I thought it might be quite interesting to look in a bit more detail for this one. So slides should be now showing, Steve.
Yeah, so, we've got those. Brilliant.
Sorry, say again?
Yes, they're up fine. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, we're there. Excellent. Okay, so here we are. It's the Manor Circus roundabout down in Mortlake. The A316 Lower Richmond Road runs east-west, and you can see Manor Road to the south and B353 to the north, whichever road that is. So the view we've just seen on Twitter is over on this side, and I'll just go to the next slide for a slightly clearer view. So approaching the roundabout here, you can see zebra crossing, 3 lanes of traffic, zebra crossing on this side, 2 lanes of traffic. The other arms aren't a huge amount better. So on this side, you've got a couple of lanes to cross on each side, and the same at the south, and so on. And the reason I've picked up on this is, if we go back to the principles of sustainable safety, one of the things where we have crossing the road is that people shouldn't have to cross more than one stream of traffic in any one go, on the basis that for the person crossing, there's a lot going on. They really want to be seeing sort of the vehicles approaching them and deal with that in one go. And for drivers, having to try and negotiate a layout where you've got lots of lanes and other things going on, that creates additional risk. So if we jump back down to the view that we started off with Twitter, we see that we've just grown a cycle track on this side here. Must be really old, because the zebra crossings themselves are not parallel for cycling. So I assume there's some cyclist dismount signs near here. And if you imagine you're driving in this left-hand lane, where that white van is, you wouldn't know if anybody's actually crossing there. Now, when you talk to drive, you talk to slow down at zebra crossings and expect people to be crossing, but obviously we're dealing in the real world here, and lots of people don't bother slowing down. So that's a safety risk straight off, and from the person using the crossing itself, that can be quite intimidating.
Here is the view down onto the southern arm there. So again, we're coming off a roundabout directly into 2 lanes of traffic. Somebody sensibly not getting off their bike, because why would you? But again, we've got this whole issue. If that van's at the crossing stop line, and you and another vehicle are coming to the right hand side of the van, you've got no view of the crossing to the left. This is the western arm, again, just to hammer home the point really, that you've got a slow moving queue of traffic on the inside lane here. So if you were crossing, as you look at it from right to left, you're completely masked by the car there, the lorry, and so on. So if you've got lanes which move at different speeds, so one might be really, really slow, one might be moving a lot quicker. Again, if the driver's not paying attention, there's obviously that collision risk with somebody crossing. Don't take my word for it that it's risky. Here is some casualty data for the roundabout. So all of the little dots here, because it's from Cycle Street, are collisions involving people cycling. The yellow dots are slight injuries. The red dots are where people have been killed or seriously injured. And just really to round off on this, because I don't have a conclusion as such, is just a bit more analysis on those collisions. So this looks at that 2016 to 2020 period, which was the current data. Cycle Street isn't always up to date on the casualty data. But if you have a look at what's happening here, and generally speaking, the casualty numbers in a particular location can be small numbers, which means they can be very volatile in terms of absolute numbers year on year, but also injuries are kind of tip of the iceberg, maybe 10–15% of the actual overall picture of non-injury collisions that don't get reported, near misses, that kind of thing. So if we just have a look at some of the numbers here, people walking and cycling, and I'm not saying for a minute that that is the crossing's fault all the way around, but as a junction, as that section of road, you've over 40% of the collisions involving people walking and cycling. I've also picked out motorcycles, because again, they're very vulnerable where you've got multi-lanes and people changing lanes and not actually noticing the motorcyclists are there. So that's also high. Of the pedestrian and cyclist collisions, 2 of those were serious, so everything else there was slight. But it's not just about the absolute numbers. If you think about the traffic flow running through this junction, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of vehicles a day, compared with people walking and cycling, which will be maybe a few hundred. The risk exposure for people crossing at that roundabout or moving through that roundabout on foot or on bike, they're much, much more highly exposed than drivers are. There are roundabouts like this, there are junctions like this all over the place. They've probably got similar collision histories, and I guess it kind of hints at the massive task we have to try and deal with these problems across the whole of the country. Thank you, Steve. I shall stop sharing.
Brilliant, Mark, as ever. Really brilliant. Excellent sleuthing as well, if not slightly distressing on that last one. Really is. Ruth, you want to come in?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, I don't use that very often. One important thing is that the roundabout is up a hill, as it were, in all directions. So it's kind of raised. So you're always cycling uphill. And the most difficult is actually if you're coming out, if you were looking at it with Richmond in the north, Chiswick in the south, then in the east, you're coming up from Kew. It's very narrow. There are cars parked both sides, there are buses, and it's almost impossible. And there is no safe cycling bit. And you have to get onto that roundabout and go around it. And if you want to go off to one of the other arms, it's impossible. The A1316 is one of those that has, somebody's counted it, I think it's 29 giveways all the way between Richmond or Twickenham and going into London. People who are anti-cycle lanes always say, well, why aren't you on the cycle lane? And most people who cycle don't use it for that very reason. And that's another thing, is that there will often be a criticism of the lack of people cycling in cycle lanes when those who don't cycle don't understand quite how dangerous and difficult it is. So it's really an important one to make Dutch style, in my opinion. Thanks, Mark.
Did you want to come back on that, Mark, at all?
Yes. Yeah, it's not a junction I've actually cycled. It's just, yeah, it popped up on Twitter kind of randomly. but I thought it's a really good example. Certainly out in my neck of the woods in Ilford Town Centre, there's a similar one where you've got, I think it's 3 lanes on one side and 2 on the other. And I go past it every so often in a slightly different position, but you see the behaviour where you've got, so I guess like this particular example as well, you've got effectively an urban motorway running through an area, and we're inviting people to cross without traffic control. So I think really as an interim measure, that kind of junction probably needs to have signals at least on the side roads. If not, the actual junction itself is probably too small to signalise successfully. The whole thing will just lock up because of the size of the roundabout. It doesn't have the stacking space. But I don't know how we can kind of have these layouts year on year hurting people and not actually get around to doing it. But yeah, I mean, especially if you haven't got proper parallel zebras, even you haven't even really got the right to cross there by cycle. So yeah, a bit of a mess, isn't it?
So it is, and also there's a Sainsbury. Just your first footage that had a young man cycling on the pavement, just out of shot is an entrance to Sainsbury. So you've also got to manage that because drivers swerve off the road. And the A316 is a huge road into London evenings, weekends, because we don't have congestion charge now. Boo, is got even busier and faster and not so nice. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Tim, did you want to come in?
Just very quickly, I was looking at that and thinking of the big roundabout on the A47 up the road from me, where it's signalised, all the arms are signalised, and it is possible to get across. But I watched pedestrians waiting a very long time to get the green man to say, yes, it's your turn to move across that bit just the other day. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. That's more a poignant point of erudition, Mark, than a question, but you might want to come back on it.
Sorry, I was busily typing a link to that particular tweet. No, I mean, you're dead right. You do signalise these things, and if you're trying to cross, say, 2 of the arms, and you end up with a minute, 2 minutes, that's quite a big chunk out of your journey. So if you're popping down the shops for 10 or 15 minutes, that could be quite a big chunk of that time. So yeah, we talk about 20-minute cities, but a quarter of that's taken up by crossing traffic lights.
And Mark, just one question from me before we move over to Claire. Just when you were running the numbers there and looking at the flow levels for different modes and the level of care size or even minor injuries, have you ever seen anybody do a kind of a social justice take on these kinds of bits of infrastructure and make a strong social justice argument around making changes to these places?
The short answer is no. The slightly longer answer is, I think the problem you have with highway authorities, where you've got limited investment coming into these locations, it's very easy to kind of revert to type and say, right, we're going to deal with the hotspots. And that doesn't necessarily mean you deal with the right locations. I think there's a very good, I guess it goes away from kind of the predict and provide parallel to going to look at the hotspots and dealing with them, and changing the argument to the decide and provide. So we've got this roundabout, actually we want people to be able to get across it, get round it. We're going to build a scheme for that reason. I guess the problem you have with that kind of thing is once you then get into the benefit cost ratio calculations, which are way above my head. I don't deal with that side of things, but they are often skewed towards driver journey time in terms of monetary values. My understanding is there has been some changes recently to the DFT calculations, and I've been working on schemes where we've looked at other metrics to really push home. We're going to do stuff for walking and cycling rather than traffic capacity, but I'm really not the expert on that.
And right, last comment, Mark Strong, over to you.
Well, I was just going to raise this. I've just been working on an AMAT, active mode appraisal tool assessment today. And actually, if you apply it properly, A, social justice and things like that do come in, and B, it comes out much higher benefit cost ratio than road building. The problem is that authorities look at it and go, yes, it's cheaper, yes, it's better, but we still prefer the road. So they can take all their tools and then they ignore it.
Thanks, Mark. Well, thank you, Mark. Again, brilliant presentation. I'm going to call that bit to a close and hand over to Claire Stocks. Just a quick story before I hand over to Claire. I've been made to look a fool by Claire and her colleagues, because on Sunday evening on Twitter, I saw a tweet from Walk Ride Greater Manchester congratulating Manchester City Council on advertising a sustainable transport director post, who was going to bring in a workplace parking levy, loads of different cars off the road. And I emailed the chief exec and the leader of the council to congratulate them, not realizing it was fake news as a campaign gag. So there you go. Claire, brilliant work. That's all I can say. Over to you.
Thanks, Steve. I'm just trying to find the tweet so we can put it in. Yes, it was our attempt to kind of campaign positively by describing the kind of role that we think. And to be fair, I think, you know, we may well be heading in that direction, but have a look at it, see what you think. And, you know, I think it did trigger a bit of a discussion about, you know, traditional highways departments and have they had their day, was the question we asked on Twitter, and a few people think they have. So how that change is being led, I'm really interested, like who's leading the change in the sector. I'd love to get someone on to talk about that, which, you know, is it the Transport Planning Society? Who's kind of the union for highways people? Please post in the chat if you've got some suggestions on that. But the reason I was just going to come back to the group was in the last sort of 10 minutes or so, I was just going to share with you an update about Ideas with Beers itself. So I will just quickly share these slides, which were a version that we saw recently, and I'm not going to dwell on them, but so this was, if those of you were here a couple of weeks ago, we just went over the review that we did, and a reminder that when we did the review, we asked people, you know, what do you value about Ideas with Beers? These are the things that came through really strongly, and you know, it was really good to see that. And we've these were the main suggestions from the community about how we take things forward, which we've started to try and do more. In summary, they were change the format a bit, so we've, you know, done that a little bit. And Ranty was on tonight. That was one of the suggestions from the review. We also did some sort of tidying up of what's our purpose, etc. We've got some new tools, including a new MailChimp, so hopefully you will get the next link for the new year via a nice fancy MailChimp email. But the last one that I wanted to come back to was that we all agreed that we needed a new name, one that reflected the things that people value, and one that perhaps gave Ideas with Beers just a little more status in this world that we're now in, and help describe what it is a bit more than Ideas with Beers does. So, oh, I've gone the wrong way there. So, new name. Well, these were the sort of four main suggestions that seem to get sort of most traction: active travel ideas, quality streets, active travel chat, and the active travel cafe. And we, as the organising group, have, you know, discussed this and thought about, well, what represents those values that people have come through? What do we think will work? You know, we do a lot of the contacting of speakers, and what's a name that makes it easy to kind of explain what we are and get people to come and talk to us. And so, without further ado, the idea that we are going to go for is this one, the Active Travel Cafe, or if you prefer, the Active Travel Caf. And we are in the process of working up kind of new logo, and the reason for telling you tonight was that if you've got any major objections that you think this is the world's most disastrous idea, tell us, but that's what we're going to do otherwise. And secondly, that while we're off next week, so we've got a break, we'll be able to hopefully make the changes to our Twitter handle and various things in order to reflect our new name. And that's not a logo, that's just, you know, some thoughts on what we might want to try and convey. And we'll hang on to, you know, the Ideas with Beers name. You know, it was our birth. So perhaps we'll have in our Twitter handle, you know, formerly Ideas of Beers and that sort of thing. We're not shunning it. It's just we feel that it's been successful, and so we need to give it that that slightly more official sounding, not official sounding, but a more self-explanatory name. And that's not to say we only cover active travel, but that is our focus, and so that's why we want that in our title. And so that's just a reminder of those values, and hopefully you feel that that name will reflect that. You know, this sense of it being a place that you come. So that's kind of why we thought cafe helped capture that.